Hi, this video is going to explore your options around configuring persistence for IBM Transformation Advisor and Red Hat OpenShift. What is persistence configuration and why do we need it? Well, containers and by extension their files and data are ephemeral in nature. So for example, when a container crashes and restarts, it will start from a clean state with all previous data lost. If we want to preserve the data that is created and used by our applications in containers, then we need to configure the containers to use some permanent storage, and that is what we mean when we talk about configuring persistence. Now, persistence is a big topic in Kubernetes, and it comes with lots of terminology and lots of options for configuring. So if you're new to this area, I would highly recommend checking out the Kubernetes documentation on storage. It will give you a good grounding on the basics and help you to understand concepts such as persistent volumes, persistent volume claims, storage classes, and more besides. Just before I get into the details, let me remind you that any time you are doing any configuration of storage, you should exercise caution. You don't want to take any action that might result in the loss or corruption of your data. If you are unsure of anything, please check with your cluster or storage administrator before proceeding. Okay, let's get going with configuring the persistence for Transformation Advisor. I'm using version 2.4.2, and when you create an instance in 2.4.2, you'll notice that the configuration for the persistence is available as a form in the UI. Let's just drill into that right now. You've got a number of options here, and Transformation Advisor is going to create a persistent volume claim according to the values that you set here. That persistent volume claim will then attempt to either bind to a persistent volume that matches your settings, or it will dynamically create and bind to a persistent volume. In the rest of the video, I will take you through some of the different options that you have for configuring the persistence. You should choose the option that best suits your environment and preferences. Using the default storage class. If your cluster has a default storage class set, then configuration is very simple. The only thing you need to do is ensure that the access mode is compatible with the storage class. My cluster is running on IBM Cloud and has IBM Block Storage as the default storage class, and I know that that is only compatible with read-write once access mode. So I'm going to go and set that. Now I'm just going to create the instance, and while Transformation Advisor is installing, we can go and monitor the persistent volume claim. We can see the claim is being created, called TA CouchDB, and eventually it's going to create and bind to a persistent volume. And we can see that has just happened, and we can monitor our installation to ensure that the Transformation Advisor pods come up as expected, and here we go. The next option I want to talk about is using a specified storage class. So if you don't have a default storage class or you want to specify a particular class, you can do that. Again, set your access mode to be compatible, and then use the drop-down storage class to find the storage class that you want to use. In this case, I'm selecting Block Gold and creating the Transformation Advisor instance. Again, we'll just monitor the persistent volume claim as the install progresses, and we'll see that eventually it will bind to a persistent volume. And our TA install proceeds as normal. The next option is to use an existing persistent volume claim. So instead of having TA create a claim for you, you can manually create the persistent volume claim and have TA use that. In this case, I've created one called TA PVC. And if we go to the persistence settings, we simply have to provide the name of that persistent volume claim, and Transformation Advisor will use that claim. I'm going to create the instance, and we can monitor the pods as they come up. The next option I want to talk about is using an NFS persistent volume. Now, for file-based storage such as NFS, things can be a bit more difficult because we have to deal with permissions. This is the case because this kind of storage is mounted to the container with the same ownership and permissions that are found on the underlying file system. This means that the container process may not have permission to read or write to that storage. The recommended way to handle this is to use supplemental group setting. The supplemental group gives the container process group ownership to the storage and consequently group level permission to allow the container process to read and write to that storage. So in this case, I've already created a persistent volume called PV01. And in order to set the supplemental group setting, I need to understand the group ownership on the file system for this persistent volume. So I'm going to go and get the file system path and have a look at it on the NFS server. So let's explore the ownership of that path on the server. And we see in this case the group is set to NFS nobody, and this is a typical scenario for an NFS share which has the root squash option set. So I'm just going to get the group ID for that group. We'll need the group ID later when configuring the persistence. So I'm going to go into the persistence settings. I'm going to set the access mode to correspond to the mode of my storage. And I'm going to add the supplemental group and create the instance. Then we can monitor the persistent volume claim as it's created and see that it's bound to the persistent volume, and monitor our pods as the install progresses. Okay, in this video I've shown you 4 options for configuring the persistence for IBM Transformation Advisor. Please check out our documentation for more details.